signed. Committee Room 30, 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 Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, Committee Room 30, signed. 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 Committee Room 30, sound. Committee Room 30, sound. Committee Room 30, sound.
Thank you. Members, the meeting is now open to the public. Just a reminder, as I always give you, the committee is going to be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. I'll come back whenever we've got some members of the public in. You're reminded that we have in order as they're appearing on screen, Ciara Ferguson, Doug Beattie, Maurice Bradley, Justin McNulty and Gemma Dolan. Members, it's proposed that the oral evidence session on trauma-informed practice and the session on January monitoring are going to be recorded by Hansard. Are members agreed? Mm-hmm. Thank you. Great. Also, we are obliged to declare any financial or other relevant interests that might reasonably be thought by others to influence our approach to matters under consideration. Any members who have interest to declare in relation to today's business should do so now or when the matter arises in the meeting. Does any member have an interest to declare at this stage? Deirdre?
Just have an immediate family member that works in the court service.
Thank you. And I have an immediate family member who works in the legal profession. Agenda item 4 is draft minutes. Those are in your pack at pages 59 to 70, and that's from the meeting, last week's meeting, which was the 5th of December. Are members content that those minutes are a true and accurate reflection of that meeting?
Content.
Thank you. Well, then I'll sign them. We don't have any matters arising. Does anybody else? Thank you. Agenda item 6 then is trauma-informed practice. Members, I would refer you to pages 72 to 98 of your meeting pack for the relevant papers. So you'll see we have a number of officials with us to provide us with an overview of trauma-informed practice in the context of the Executive Programme on Paramilitarism and Organised Crime, otherwise known as EPOC. So I would like to welcome Adele Brown, who's the head of the Executive Programme on Paramilitarism and Organised Crime, Helen Mackenzie, who's the Director of Operations for the Safeguarding Board for Northern Ireland, Colleen Heaney, who's the Director of Youth Justice Services in the Youth Justice Agency, and Michael McCracken, who's the Principal Psychologist from the Probation Board for Northern Ireland. Thank you very much, all of you, for joining us. We're really looking forward to what you've to say to us today. We've read your presentation. We'll work on the basis that you maybe give us a briefing of 10 or 15 minutes and then take some questions. Is that all right?
That sounds great. Thank you very much.
On that basis, thank you very much. Thanks for coming again. You're very welcome, and I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here. We have a presentation prepared on the screen, and we'll try and get through it as quickly as possible. We're trying to cram in a lot of information, so we'll do that as quickly as we possibly can. I hope that's all visible to you. We wanted to talk to you about the need for a trauma-informed Northern Ireland, and maybe the best place to start is actually to try and talk about trauma itself and that word and what it actually means. And the definition in front of you says that trauma results from events or circumstances that are perceived by someone as being physically or emotionally harmful and can lead to lasting adverse effects on their well-being. And there's lots of stereotypes and misconceptions about what trauma is and what it isn't. And it can look like very obvious mental distress of the type which is pictured in front of you, but it can also mean that somebody presents asymptomatically or presents as being entirely normal in quotation marks. What we do know is that it can condition a lot of behaviours, including emotional self-regulation, impulse control and decision making. And if we lift that up a level from individuals into families, that can look like traditions. And if we talk about communities, that can sometimes look like culture. And if we go to a more strategic level in terms of politics and public discourse, it can look like binary adversarial position taking, an inability to find common ground with others who have different views, and generally being stuck in terms of working through complexity and change. Now, there's a lot in that, but the key word is can, because trauma, as everybody will talk about here today, doesn't need to lead to bad outcomes, and bad outcomes are not necessarily always the result of trauma. We don't want to pathologise this issue. But what is really important when we're talking about this issue is that we understand what trauma looks like and we understand how we can respond to it. And in doing that, we can make sure that people are able to bounce back, communities are able to thrive, and actually we can move on from that. And we want to give you a bit of a good news story today and tell you about how good Northern Ireland is at this. It is world leading in many respects, and that's really pleasing to be able to say. And we want to be able to give you insights from the Safeguarding Board, Youth Justice, Probation Board, but also to say why we need that across Northern Ireland as a whole and across all of our aspects of public life. Trauma often starts in childhood, and the slide in front of you, which is produced by a Safeguarding Board, is called the pair of ACEs. So it can be about individual relationships and interactions, but it can also be, adversity can also come from adverse community environments of the sort that are on that slide, and people's interactions with organisations. This goes to show just how complex all of this is and how challenging it can be sometimes to address it. One of the key things, as I've said, that's really important to understand is why it is that we struggle to address trauma, or people struggle to address trauma. Many people want to address their adversity and trauma but can't. They are stuck and they need help to do that. And if that is not resolved and it's left to fester, it can lead to adverse consequences. We are very aware that adverse childhood experiences are strongly associated with aggression, violence, criminal behaviour, risk of incarceration, and also being a victim. And these are the sorts of impacts that affect everybody across the population. Now, in Northern Ireland, we have the same adversities as many other jurisdictions, but we also experience adversities that are linked to past violence and conflict, with 1/3 of our adult population experiencing and reporting conflict-specific adversities. Those living in more deprived areas are more likely to report exposure to this sort of adversity. And sadly, we see an awful lot of this in our work in the executive programme on paramilitarism, both with adults and young people. And with the young people, what we are seeing is an intergenerational effect in terms of trauma. On one project alone, 93% of our young people screened positive for trauma, compared to a population level equivalent of 37%. Now, we are very keen to talk about the personal impact on this, on people, but there is a financial cost to this issue as well, and it's estimated to be around about 1.3 billion a year, which is a significant amount of money. So all of that adds up to a very complex picture. It's trauma will land, executive policies, strategies, initiatives will all land to some extent on people who have experienced adversity and trauma. So thinking about that very consciously is something that we're keen to promote. As I said at the start, fortunately, Northern Ireland is really good at this, and we're already a long way along that journey towards becoming trauma-informed as an area, as a jurisdiction. And Helen's going to talk a little bit more about just what's been done already.
It's actually really nice to be able to report that Northern Ireland is world leading in some of its practice in terms of adopting a trauma-informed approach, both in the public sector and in the third sector. And there's nothing about what I'm going to talk to you about that we sort of reinvented the wheel in 2018. Many people had been already working in a trauma-informed and ACE-aware manner. It was about us starting to get a common language and a consistency and a standardisation. So in 2018, the Safeguarding Board commenced, I suppose, its trauma-informed journey to raise awareness of adverse childhood experiences across its 21 member agencies. And that was to develop a trauma-informed workforce as part of the Early Intervention Transformation Programme. And that was across health, education, justice, social care and the community and voluntary sector. So we've worked across these sectors really in the broadest sense. So if we take education, for example, that has been from early years up into higher education, looking at how we can, I suppose, grow the next set of professionals. So in terms of social workers and doctors and nurses and teachers and paediatricians and AHPs, so that they will come into the workforce already with an awareness of adversity and the impact on those that they will serve. As part of the work, We partnered with practitioners and leaders, but most importantly, people with lived experience, who we were really privileged that they shared their life stories with us in order to try and improve outcomes for those who come behind them, but also for their peer groups in terms of how they can mitigate trauma. We developed a huge number of resources which are on the screen there, and it really is about having something for everybody depending on where they were in that journey, but also about us making sure that we were delivering something that was Northern Ireland specific, that people could relate to. So we have our Northern Ireland specific animation. We were very keen that it represented us and it wasn't from elsewhere, but also different levels of training which was relate to, I suppose, as vanilla training, generic training, level 1 and level 2, and also a train the trainer programme. We have almost 500 trainers in Northern Ireland trained in order to disseminate that, and the associated resources that go with that. But again, there was specific bespoke training for professionals across their different disciplines, and that was co-designed with them. All of this work has been independently evaluated. So it's not just that it was out there and we'll see whether it works. It's actually been independently evaluated and continues to be so. So in addition to those original training modules, the bespoke training was first trialled or piloted with the PSNI in Derry City and Strabane. The PSNI worked in terms of what had come out of the National Policing College in the vulnerability work stream, and developed their training in line and connection with that. And the PSNI has gone on to train over 3,000 frontline officers in ACE and TIP awareness, and have embedded this training within their 23-week student officer training programme and across their crime training. And they've also taken that into their occupational health department to look at secondary and vicarious trauma, not only for officers but also for families and partners of officers. So we moved on from that, I suppose, from the 2018, which was really quite a lot of push on raising awareness and training. And then in 2023, we looked at, okay, how can we really understand? We'd done original research with Queen's in 2018. We really want to say, how can we really embed this now? We've got the basics, and how can we embed it? So we partnered with Trauma Informed Oregon and Portland State University as the first of the international pilots that have been done, and both Colleen and Michael have been part of that, and you'll hear from that later. They developed what they called a trauma-informed care implementation tool, because it's all right us saying, yes, we're doing it, and yes, we're doing it properly, but do we really know, and what are the outcomes? And that tool was designed to assist organisations, systems, agencies in implementing that trauma-informed practice. So how was the approach of their business they're going to know that they were doing it properly? Then how would they evaluate that, and how would they know that their practice was aligned to those correct principles? And we've monitored that, and that has been a really, really important part, but also to know that Northern Ireland is adding to that international reference point and that research. And then in February 2024, we asked Queen's University to review again where had Northern Ireland come since 2018, and how far were we in embedding that approach. There has been significant commitment from organisations, partners, both at a service level and at an organisational level, and the leaders that have made that happen. And they said essentially we have come full circle from that, bottom up, middle out, and leaders at an agency level. But what we required was then government and political support for us really to be able to realise the benefits of a trauma-informed approach. All of the resources continue to be available and updated, and are available free at point of delivery for all of the member agencies of the SPNI, but also all government departments and partner agencies. And Colleen and Michael will be able to tell you what that looks like in reality. Thank you.
Over to me. So I'm going to give you a sense of what applying a trauma-informed approach within an organisation looks like. And we're working collaboratively here. I've had to share Helen's glasses. So, as Adele mentioned previously, adversity in childhood doesn't necessarily lead to poor outcomes. With mitigating factors, the impact of that adversity or trauma can be overcome. And these mitigating factors, which are evidence-based, include having one or more stable or caring adult, having a sense of purpose, feeling connected and building resilience. Through our interventions with children involved in offending, Youth Justice attempts to replicate these mitigating factors in our plans of work. For example, focusing on building family relationships or rebuilding with caregivers to build emotional stability and support, working with our colleagues in CAMS to build mental health resilience, connecting children to education, training and employment, which helps create a sense of purpose, and creating opportunities for connection through community engagement in sport and charity work, for example. We know by doing this we give hope, which creates space to allow for healing. It's supportive, it demonstrates empathy and love, and it leads to opportunities for change. We like to think, if this was your child, how would you want them to be treated and what type of service would you want them to receive? You want them to learn from their behaviour and stop doing anything negative that they're doing, but you'd also want those working with them to care and to have their best interests at heart. That's a trauma-informed approach. This also applies to how we work with parents and carers and victims as well. It allows for a safe psychological and physical space for staff, not just to work in, but to thrive in. Staff are central to a trauma-informed approach. It doesn't exist without the understanding and buy-in of staff. So we need to care for our staff as a central component, as they are the ones mitigating the trauma and can often suffer from secondary and vicarious trauma themselves. So staff well-being is a key component of what we call this whole systems approach. A whole systems approach also means that those individuals that travel through the criminal justice system get a better service. As we share and have a shared understanding of the impact of trauma with our colleagues in the PPS, the police, probation, prison service, as well as wider departments in health and education, the services and the individual can start to understand the behaviours and be given and create the opportunities to change. It's more collaborative, it's more cost effective, we're using the same resource, but we're using it differently, leading to better outcomes. And this has recently been picked up on by two Sejini inspections, the recent inspection of Youth Justice and the recent inspection of Hydebank Wood. To help conceptualise what a whole systems approach within an organisation looks like, I'm sharing this infographic now that's on the screen. So this is how you grow a trauma-informed culture. All the flowers are the principles of a trauma-informed approach. I'm not going to go into them all because I don't have enough time, but I'm going to draw your attention to three. So the first one is leadership and government. You cannot have a collaborative trauma-informed approach without strong leadership. And within Youth Justice, we did that by setting up a strategic steering group, a champions model to take the message out to teams. We have an implementation plan. We still have an implementation plan. It's a journey, it's not a destination. We ensured all our policy and procedures were aligned with our children's first approach and our model of practice, and we reviewed our physical environments and introduced softer rooms that were more young person friendly, both in the community and custody. And you can take the time, this has been shared in your briefing pack afterwards if you want to explore that more in the hyperlink. I'm also going to draw your attention to workforce development because I've already mentioned the importance of staff. As part of workforce development, obviously you have training, learning, development and support, and we have different levels of training. So all staff universally were trained in ACE awareness, from the groundskeeper and the catering staff and custody right up to chief executive level. We then have bespoke training for those who are working directly with children's families and victims, specialist trauma training. But I also would like to draw your attention to the initiatives that we've developed to support staff. And one of them I'd like to point out is the guidance that we developed in the death of a child. This was an issue that was raised by staff. Unfortunately, we work with children who are involved in risk-taking and chaotic lives, and occasionally we lose children. And the guidance was developed to support staff around how they manage that, both in terms of their grief and in work, what they can expect. in developing that, we approached paediatrics, we approached CAMS, we approached other organisations. Nobody had a guidance. So this was the first of its kind in Northern Ireland, and has subsequently been picked up by the Public Health Agency to take forward for other organisations. And finally, I'd like to draw your attention to the cultural diversity flyer. As I said, this is a journey, not a destination. So at times, we will put more efforts into different areas. This is an area we're still growing our trauma-informed approach to. So we've been horizon scanning around to understand the impact of trauma on our neurodivergent population. We are beginning to see unaccompanied minors feature in the youth justice system who have horrendous experiences, and we need to shape our services around how we support them, as well as understanding other diversity issues, for example, the travelling community, and how we best respond to their needs too. So what are the benefits? The benefits were shared with you in your briefing pack, but I'd like to kind of give you a quick synopsis. The benefits are highlighted in the Queen's research that Helen alluded to, but one of them is having a better understanding of the most complex cases and a shared language across services, which leads to better service delivery and working in the best interests of the child. So people are coming together, they're talking differently about behaviours, and everybody's working in a way that is more collaborative to create a better outcome for the most complex children. Victims are also satisfied as they feel not only have they been heard and their needs met through the restorative process, but the child is receiving a service that's impactful, so they trust the outcome in terms of the plan that's been developed. And lastly, staff. We've created a culture where staff have reported not only do they feel safe, but they feel valued. So for Youth Justice Agency, embedding a trauma-informed approach, it wasn't an option, it was the right thing to do. Not just for the children, the families and the victims we serve, not just for staff, but for society as a whole. So I'm now going to pass back to Adele.
And I'm going to very quickly pass over to Michael, and we'll continue on through just talking a little bit more about how probation have experienced this and the journey that they've been on too.
Thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about why in probation we feel this is very important, and I will tell you a bit as well about where we are on our journey, which is not quite as far along as youth justice. Probation plays a central role in criminal justice in Northern Ireland. You will find our staff working in courts, working in the community, working across the 3 prison sites, as well as working directly with victims of crime. And probation is on a journey to become a trauma-informed organisation. Within criminal justice, the prevalence rates for trauma and adverse childhood experiences are much higher than in the general population. 1/3 of women and 1/4 of men in the adult prison population were taken into care as a child, compared with 2% of the general population. And almost half of women and men in the adult prison population observed violence in the home, compared to 14% of the general population. As Adele has already said, adverse childhood experiences have been found to be strongly associated with aggression, violence, defiant and criminal behaviour. An increased tendency to respond to situations through anger or aggression appears to be exacerbated by domestic violence that children witness or experience as victims. Also relevant is people who have experienced multiple adverse childhood experiences are more likely to become victims of crime. Unresolved trauma continues to manifest for many into adulthood, and our service users in probation face challenges, for example, in maintaining social relationships, in finding and maintaining employment. These issues often lead to further marginalisation, so for many, the criminal justice system becomes a revolving door, perpetuating cycles of harm, poverty and crime. to effectively change behaviour, to reduce harm and to protect the public, we see a need to recognise and to respond to the trauma experienced by our service users. In addition to that, all staff that work in criminal justice work in a profession where there is a high risk of being exposed to traumatic events that may at times exert a critical impact on staff psychological well-being. We want to develop an organisation that is a psychologically safe place for staff who are often having to carry quite a lot of risk in terms of their supervision of our service users. So we want to pay acute and sustained attention to workforce resilience, well-being, and to create a culture in which our staff can flourish. We further recognise that victims, families, and witnesses of crime are often traumatised too. So probation have completed a trauma-informed audit and assessment process with the support of SBNI, and we have used the Trauma-Informed Oregon Assessment Tool. That tool has provided for us a baseline report which lets us know where we are, and it also maps out where we can go and how we can develop. So we're undergoing a systemic organisational change process. And that includes developing our culture and our climate, how we train all of our staff, feedback processes, how we design our services, and it's also about reviewing our policies, processes and procedures. We have set up a trauma and resilience implementation group. At work we have representation from across all of the different professional groups. And we're in the process of mapping out our implementation plan and starting to roll that out. What we want from this is to get to a place where we are minimising the risk of re-traumatisation. We want to be better at recognising signs of trauma within our staff and within our service users, within families and victims that we work with. And we want to respond in ways that reduces the impact of trauma on people and promotes recovery. Now, whilst we're early in the journey and we don't have outcome measures as yet, what we expect to see as a result of being trauma-informed is greater staff satisfaction, less staff grievance, less sickness absence, greater service user engagement, and better quality of relationships within the organisation and between staff and service users. Thank you.
So we're going to run through this very, very quickly as we're conscious of your time. We've tried to give you a sense of just how good the practice is in terms of frontline service delivery, some of the organisational change that is going on within respective organisations, and this is not limited to the organisations represented here, it's much wider than that, and it's not always called trauma-informed practice or trauma-informed approaches. It could be called problem solving, it could be restorative work. There's lots of things out there, but the point is Northern Ireland is really, really good at this. Where we need to take it to the next level is in terms of making sure that that response exists across the system and across public life. It's not enough just to have it in terms of frontline specialist services, it has to be across the board. We've shared this slide with you before. This horrible slide makes no more sense if you zoom into it, I have to say. It's not just the screen size. This was mapped out in terms of our working environment within the Executive Programme on Paramilitarism and Organised Crime. And if fundamentally our programme is about changing behaviours and attitudes and improving our effectiveness in terms of addressing paramilitarism and organised crime, you can see how difficult it is for us to navigate this system. This is our operating environment. Now, if we are dedicating all our time and effort to do this, can you imagine how difficult it is for individuals to actually be able to do that themselves in terms of practical everyday life? We want to see something that is far more streamlined, far more effective, far more collaborative.
So if we were looking at something more about how would we look at our strategies, we'd look at a whole systems approach, and we look at that joined up. So simple design, simple process, co-design, lived experience included in it, and collaboration across the boundaries. We hear on multiple occasions when people are talking about the strategy that they're interested in, about how we need to work together, but actually we need to look together before we've got the strategy produced. It will give us more effective ways of working with the public. It will increase morale for those who are having to deliver. There will be improved communication and collaboration between the systems and the services, and that is a really key point. And we believe that it will be more cost effective. We will be able to evaluate and review what we're doing in a much easier way, and we'll be able to know when we are spending money effectively and getting the positive results. We believe there will be improvements in staff wellbeing, confidence and morale, and we also see that there will be increased access to service for service users, which is obviously what this is all about.
To do that, we need strategic leadership, and we need it now. And we're delighted to see that there are multiple references within the draft programme for government to trauma-informed approaches. That's a really welcome commitment. Taking that commitment from words on paper into actual daily life, into the life of the Northern Ireland Civil Service, into the life of committees, into scrutiny, is something that we are really keen to delve into in more detail. And I guess that's where we're really interested in how we can work with you and support you to do that. There are some specific asks within the briefing paper that we shared with you for us to be able collectively within our organisations, all adopting slightly different approaches to this, to make the next jump between frontline excellence into a truly trauma-informed Northern Ireland. We need to be able to bridge that gap, and political support for that is absolutely critical. You, as a scrutiny committee, have such an important role to play in looking into how departments discharge their statutory responsibilities, not just what they do, but how they do it. And so not just this committee, but many other committees we think are ideally placed to start on this journey. And we'd certainly be very glad and very pleased and privileged if you would consider engaging individually with us on this, and perhaps engaging in some master classes around about this so that we can support you in this journey, but also in continuing to ask other people about what they are doing within their own departmental plans, their own efforts, strategies, design and commissioning of services to make this leap. There are huge benefits to this. It doesn't need to be pathologised. It doesn't need to be weaponised. This can be something that is about common sense, empathy and effectiveness, and there's an awful lot here that we can build on. So I think unless anyone wants to add anything, we'll stop there. Thank you.
Over to us then.
Yes.
Folks, thank you very much. It's been really helpful, and the committee has been really interested in trauma-informed practice, what it means and what it looks like. Just to give you an outline now as to what's going to happen, we're already half an hour behind schedule, so first of all, can I apologise for keeping you late? But we had some business around the bill we needed to attend to first. In terms of the questions that we're going to get to, we're going to aim to be succinct, and likewise we'd ask the same from you. We have some general questions that I'm going to pose, and then we've questions around resources and toolkits from the Deputy Chairperson, and then Connie is going to ask a couple of bits and pieces around collaboration. If other members want to come in, I'm certain that they'll indicate. I usually go last, but because my questions are really general, I'm going to go first on this occasion, so please bear with me. So my original question was just around, there are a lot of specifics in your paper about the changes for individuals and how these approaches impact an individual. What I was seeking to understand was, so how in practice have approaches changed? Now Helen, you touched on it to some extent, but what I'm trying to understand, for example, Adele, is in some of the EPOC programmes and projects that are currently underway, what's being done differently now than would have been done before you started to introduce this approach?
So in terms of our projects, and others will want to speak about this, the introduction of trauma-informed approaches gives a lot of projects a different starting point for looking at really complex problems. So in our case, we have been able to refine interventions. We've been able to make them more effective because we are able to better understand what the people's needs are that are involved in that. Now, that will vary across different projects, and some will need to be more involved in this than others. But fundamentally, it has allowed us to, in real time, become far more effective in terms of making sure that the interventions are actually meeting the needs of those that we're seeking to support, because with the best of intention, projects start off with an idea of how something should work. What's really important is being able to have the courage at any point to say, actually, there's another way that we can do this and we can continually improve this. Trauma-informed approaches allow us to do that, and they allow us to do that across a range of different projects. I don't know if there's
practically, in terms of youth justice, what are we doing differently to what we were doing differently prior to 2018, is we have reshaped our service delivery. So, for example, one of the improvements has been our Youth Justice Agency needs assessment. Previously, that focused on risk. We know that's not an appropriate measure for children. It now focuses on need. We look at the history of the child from development, from birth onwards, particularly those children who are complex kids. We've developed an enhanced case management system, which is a really collaborative, multidisciplinary, wraparound approach, which involves health, that involves education ourselves and others to support the child. And we also have reinvigorated our family work, because we don't work with the child in isolation, we work with the family. So those are some really core differences that are because we're us embedding a trauma-informed approach.
Thank you. My other question then just is around your ask of us. And you had indicated, I suppose there's an individual level and then there's as a committee. And I'm not going to commit the committee to anything. The committee will make its own decision and doubtless will come back to you, but I know that everybody's very engaged in this issue and very supportive. But in terms of the master classes and so on, what does that look like? What does your ask from us look like practically?
There's time. There's a time to commit to take some time to actually do the training or a variation on the theme of the training, because what we haven't spoken to you about today in detail is that understanding of what adversity in childhood that is not mitigated, what that does to the individual and what that carries across the life course. So the neuroscience piece of that, what that means for how you can mitigate that, what you would expect to see, in things that you're maybe supporting or committing or agreeing to in terms of spend. So it literally is, I suppose, in that point, it's a time-based commitment. Initially, we had done some work with the previous Permanent Sec for Justice, and he gave us 5 hours, which was really quite telling. So that literally is it. It's to really understand what you're getting now is such a minuscule amount of the detail, for you then to be able to take that and apply that into every aspect of what you're doing, both personally and professionally. So there's that as that core piece. And then it's about talking about this in areas where people maybe wouldn't expect it. So people would probably expect to see this in, a health committee or where we talk about a service. But if we want to talk about it in finance, and we want to talk about it in resource and procurement, and how we're looking at capital spend and how we're reviewing those types of things, what does this mean for the bigger Northern Ireland PLC? It's about giving you that information so that you can really start to bring this conversation into areas where you wouldn't think you would normally do that.
That's really helpful, Helen. I think in terms of following up on that, it might be useful if you maybe put something to us in writing as to what you're thinking, yes, and then we can follow up with that about what we can as individuals or collectively commit to, and we'll take it from there. Is that all right? But it'll also enable us to have an informed conversation around it ourselves. So thank you for that. I'm going to move on now to the Deputy Chairperson, who's got some questions around resources and the toolkit.
Sorry, and apologies, I had to get up and deal. I was dealing with a sudden death in a community, but obviously feeds into the issues you're talking about and the intersectionality between individuals, community, agencies that respond to these things. And I suppose just on the first thing, you talk about the creation of a centre of excellence and obviously the ending in terms of the current cycle in 2027, I think it is. So it's just, where would you see responsibility for this going forward sitting, firstly in terms of government and the resourcing around that? Another question around, I suppose, for us, you can see the agencies that are involved in it, where the pressures are felt in terms of those that are facing out into the community, and where they can see that at the cold face and they're interacting. So what is the buy-in like from others then, in terms of, as you say, in terms of finance and how that shapes policy and implementation, and I suppose bringing that social justice lens and perspective to the work. What has the buy-in been, and what more could be done outside of what you're trying to do now? And the other bit is in terms of that community perspective, because obviously early warning and prevention, trying to move to that mode of delivery rather than the stick and plaster at the other end, and kind of trying to stop the avalanche that comes. How do we then? What's your view on how we can start to shift that? And how we bring, I suppose, communities with us as we're starting to look through that, and something on how we build resilience. I think there's a big thing, if there's any kind of from some of the work you've done, either organisational resilience in terms of those that are working on these programmes or the pressures that we see across society, but also that kind of community resilience. Is there a step change that needs to be done, or is there good piloting or model work that we're doing here or elsewhere that we could showcase in terms of that area of resilience?
Shall I start with the funding point? So currently we are the sole funders, the Executive Programme on Paramilitarism and Organised Crime is the sole funders of the SBNI's work on trauma-informed approaches. We're very privileged to do that, but it seems fundamentally precarious, and it doesn't really seem to be the right place to be funding this from, because this is much wider than paramilitarism and organised crime, as we've discussed. There is a real challenge here because, as you say, we have no committed funding in a couple of years, and what we don't want to do is lose the good work that has been done. Now, I think Helen's model and those who she's worked with has meant that a lot of this has already been embedded, and we won't lose that, but we really need to keep taking this to the next level. So we haven't got a solution for that. Where it should sit across the executive, and fundamentally it should be sustainable. But that's a discussion that we will be really happy to have with all ministers, I think, in all departments, because, as I say, it feels fundamentally wrong in principle that it should be sitting within the programme that it's at the moment.
I think there's something about what has been developed so far. We had the funding through EITP and Atlantic Philanthropies, which was absolutely excellent, and that really has, I suppose, underpinned everything that has been developed to date. But all organisations train, all organisations recruit new staff. We have courses at university, they have their modules, so it really is about how do we embed this knowledge throughout the mainstay of other areas of work. So there isn't that sort of big spend in terms of you're doing this trauma-informed practice or this extra piece. It should be actually within what you're already committed to in terms of that. There obviously is something about you always want to be learning and improving, and the Centre of Excellence is from that perspective. If you thought maybe more of like a hub and spoke concept, that there are other experts feeding into that, and at the centre you can have that overview and see what does that mean. There is something about being really respectful of the work that has been done before. This just didn't start in 2018. It just wasn't manufactured through the 21 member agencies of the SBNI. It was just about putting a language and a formality to that. So I think a Centre of Excellence is about us trying to really the continuous improvement, evaluate, monitor, review, be really good with our spend, and that's really what the model looks like from that perspective. In terms of what has already been developed, everything is there, it is free, and the organisations build on that by adding their own professional knowledge into that. We've had really great commitment, and we've had over 1,300 downloads of the toolkit that was launched in September. We've had Tony and Guy downloading that toolkit. This is really across all, because the staff welfare piece of this, you could say that you're looking at hairdressers actually as some form of therapy. What do they hear? What do they take? That is real, true connection with the community. We've had it through academia in terms of different organisations in Australia and internationally. So it is about that connection. The community and voluntary sector, when we started this, were actually ahead of the game. We commissioned that out because the public sector wasn't ready for ACE awareness, but the community and voluntary sector were. They are offering a level of support to communities within communities across different groups that really is second to none, and I think we're starting to get a balance now between the statutory agencies and an understanding, and that's about respect as well between the different sectors. Just on the point of the individual sits with everybody else sort of going around them, and it's incumbent upon us to have the system operating in the same way, going in the same direction, so that we make the best possible opportunities for those individuals. You'd asked about where do we start? Well, we start pre-birth. We start preconception, actually. We understand what the science says about fetus in the womb. We understand about intergenerational trauma, about trauma across the genome. We have all that information. So now we can start to do, build on what is there in terms of, when we were getting ready for baby, getting ready for toddler. But we can also look to mitigate. And you asked about resilience, and Colleen and Michael will be better placed on this, but it is about that trusted adult. It is about that connectedness to community. It is about us understanding about what makes people tick. And I would also say a teenage risk-taking brain is a good thing. It creates our personalities. We don't want to do away with that, but we want to hold and protect our most vulnerable and stop them falling through the gaps. So we can do that in that collaborative way.
Sorry, just on that point, because stigma, I suppose, is an issue when you say trauma or things like that, and do people or communities or organisations identify that that's them, just a wee bit like deprivation? So I'm just wondering, is there work or have you met challenges around stigma and how you've kind of shifted that, in terms of having conversations that communities or organisations want to be resilient, they want to be out front on these things. And are there opportunities, I suppose, to do more?
There's opportunities to call it whatever you want. So if it's about stress, let's call it, we're looking at stress. Yeah. If we're talking about wealth building, or we're talking about empowerment, call it whatever it is. It's the principles behind it that are the key point here. So the language, we might have a particular language based on research or, in a certain profession, but we don't need to take that out where people won't understand it. We don't want it to alienate. We literally want it to be that as long as we're applying it and doing it with hope and honesty and respect, it really doesn't matter what it's called. I would also say, I think that we have a lot of very resilient communities in Northern Ireland, that it's not about us from the centre telling them, it's about us listening and understanding and hearing that. And we've seen really good work through a number of different community projects, but also in developing women that is funded through EPOC, and we really see that empowerment. We see those links in with EVOG, we see those links in with all the research that's gone into children and at risk of or experiencing paramilitarism, violence in the home, violence in the street. We get that, and we can really learn from what people are telling us about culture and identity and those traditions, and make that real. So then you just put it into the language that people understand.
Yeah, I'd like to add just one or two thoughts to that briefly, if I can. A good example about language. Oregon decided to go with trauma-informed Oregon. Wisconsin have opted for resilient Wisconsin as their approach. What they're doing is very, very similar, if not, you could say the same, and what they're trying to achieve is the same. And within probation, we have opted for trauma and resilience in terms of how we're describing our implementation. Now, I agree completely with Helen that I don't think it matters what you call it. You can call it flourishing environments, you can call it creating healthy and well spaces, but you make it inclusive and approachable, so to overcome any barriers with stigma. I did have one or two brief thoughts as well about the question of resilience. Not everybody that experiences adverse childhood experiences is traumatised or become traumatised. There's lots of mitigating factors that can affect how people respond. There are the events that they experience, there's how they evaluate those and what the supports are that are around them, and then there is the effect that these things have. However, what I would say is that individual resilience will only take any of us so far. And I think that we really need to be looking at organisational and systemic changes in order to support resilience more broadly. And I'd be happy to send some further information to the committee around some research on that.
Useful, thank you.
Thank you.
You finished, Deirdre?
Yeah.
Thank you, Connie. I'm going to
Yeah,
hand over
thank
to
you. Thank you, everybody, for coming in today. A lot of what kind of questions I had in mind after reading the report you have addressed, particularly around collaboration. You'd said, Adele, it's not really just linked to tackling paramilitarism and justice. And I think something that came out through it that I'd like to know more about is collaboration with schools, particularly with the Education Department of Education and our schools and youth services, and how especially you can, ensure trauma-informed practice for young people through that.
So one of the bespoke areas of training that we did was through the Department of Education and the link in with EA, and we developed training specifically for teachers that is online at level 1 and level 2, and that has gone out. That was launched actually by the minister, a previous minister for education, and then all schools were written out to about how could they take part of their 5 days of training to do this training, and EA in particular has been very involved. They're a member of the Safeguarding Board about how do we actually practically apply that. You may have heard of Operation Encompass. That is totally vested in a trauma-informed approach about understanding about domestic violence as an adversity and how that fits in with the professionals that come into contact with those children and those adults. So it was really about understanding and again about taking away the stigma. It was about if a child comes into school and the homework's not done, or a child comes into school and they're very, very quiet, that actually is quite a learning as well. Or if they have a language of violence, what is actually going on? What has happened to you? Not what is wrong with you. It's really back to basics, and so Department of Education and EA have been totally supportive. Have in the beginning we've started some of the initial pilots looking at ACE awareness and training. Also we've worked across that with numerous hundreds of teachers have come to stakeholder events, and that's how we were able to define and deliver that. And then there's the specialist education that in terms of say EODIS or similar to that has also been playing in this space. And then Colleen, if you would have some links in with that as well.
Yeah, I mean, practically on the ground, what does that look like? We work collaboratively with schools, so we provide a targeted schools programme. It's not for every school, it's for schools which have the most, are linked to having the most, in the areas of highest deprivation, have the most concern, and we'll approach that school, or sometimes they approach us to see if there's any kids that would benefit with us going in to deliver a programme of work which is tailored to the needs of the child in the school. We also work with kids who are in EODIS. Some of our kids are EODIS kids. We work with education welfare. We work with the youth service on a daily basis, may I add. Part of our role is reconnecting children back into their community through the youth service. It's supporting them to re-engage with education through education welfare and EODIS. So there is collaboration across that, but there's also one of the positives of this, and education being a member agency of SPNI, is the shared language of trauma. So when we're talking about the behaviours, we're talking about the needs, we're all coming singing from the same hymn sheet to create bespoke interventions for that child that we hope are more impactful and lead to better lives.
Thank you. I think most questions I had you have addressed throughout, so I really thank you, and I think this presentation would be good for not just this committee but others as well, so hope you get that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you, Connie. Does anybody else online? Justin? Go ahead, Justin.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Chair. Thank you, Adele, Helen, Colleen and Meg. I just firstly want to applaud you all on your obvious empathy for people who've experienced people in communities and organisations where trauma is an issue. You've demonstrated huge empathy and understanding. I think with you people leading a systems-based approach to addressing that, I think it's encouraging to say the least. In terms of how you proceed with consistency, do you see a bit of 4 legs good, 2 legs better in terms of communication in relation to paramilitarism in particular?
I'm sorry, I just lost the last part of that question there.
Just repeat your question, please, Justin.
Do you see a little bit of an almost 4 legs good, 2 legs better position taken in terms of consistency in relation to dealing with paramilitarism?
What do you mean by that, Justin? About your 4 legs? thing?
I
Just
mean,
explain
that's
that.
current day paramilitarism is bad. Past day paramilitarism is good.
So I think
And it's glorified. It's glorified now
I think
and consistently.
where we're coming from is there is no hierarchy of harm here in terms of trauma-informed approaches. We are looking at the needs of people as we find them and trying to develop solutions both specifically on the front line for them, but also from a system-wide perspective that addresses that. And that's very much about looking at whatever we find in front of us. And I think each individual organisation represented here and others will deal with that slightly different depending on what they find. And that's an appropriate response because this has to be individualised. But there's a broad range of services available to people regardless of when or how they might have experienced adversity and trauma. If there's anything anybody else wants to add.
Okay, Justin?
Okay, there was reference to how you needed strategic leadership on that front, so I just was curious to know if you had if you saw any inconsistencies. In terms of, Michael, what you said, individual resilience will only take any of us so far. Tell me what you mean by that, Michael.
Well, what I mean by that is that there are circumstances that some of us may experience in life that will just tax the coping abilities of anybody. We all have a limit. And I think that, there are certain things that I said can mitigate whether or not an adverse experience becomes trauma, and that can be our age, it can be the kind of supports that we have around us. It can be features of our psychological functioning. But I think the research evidence would suggest that organisational changes and organisational supports are actually very powerful at mitigating challenging and adverse experiences that individuals have.
And you've agreed to send us some more information in terms of how you specifically are describing that issue, that one particular issue around individual coping strength. So some people, whilst they might appear to be very strong psychologically, but there's only so much anybody can take and so much burden one person can carry without support in some capacity. Is that the gist of it, Michael?
Yes, I think that's the gist of it, yes.
Okay, I'd love to see that further information on that front, Michael, please.
Thank you, Justin. Ciara?
I'm conscious of the time, so I'll try to be quick and just thank you, Dale, Helen and Colleen and Michael. And I suppose thank you for taking the leadership, because that's what's needed. It's the leadership within organisations at whatever level throughout government. Just to declare, I was quite sceptical back many years ago, probably 10, 12 years ago, when this first came about with the adverse childhood experiences. And I was involved in the MACE project, which was funded through Europe, particularly in the health service. And I was part of the guinea pig originally when they were doing the adverse childhood experiences and made us all actually do it ourselves in OMA many, many years ago. Couple of things, just I suppose, to me, it's just common sense. And as you mentioned, the CMV sector, it's about asking the right questions. It's not about what did you do, but how did you get here? And I suppose it's the individual who is the expert in their journey, and it's about having that empathy, compassion, those listening skills. So I welcome it being embedded across your organisations, and you are leading on that. I would just like to ask the question, I suppose, particularly here in justice, is the likes of our court system, is the likes of our prison service, are, throughout the whole justice process, are they engaged and involved in driving forward trauma-informed practice within their organisations? And then I suppose that's the main question within justice, and I'm conscious it's across departments. And just any idea how you think, and I know it is about leadership, and it's just about a change across. It's about reducing the institutional barriers, because I always believed there's a lot of institutional barriers, and that's a lot to do with time and resources for particularly people on the front line, how to support people and having the resources available. So around any institutional barriers that you find still exist, to be able to embed this across the department. So that's probably the two questions. Across justice, is it being implemented throughout justice? and then what other institutional barriers may exist to fully embed it and support staff to have the time, the compassion, the empathy, to have an trauma-informed approach to their practice on a daily basis. Thank you.
It is being embedded across all of justice. I have to say, from the Department of Justice, actually, they have a very good structure. It's being hugely supported by the Minister, really overtly supported by the Minister, and an understanding, and she articulates at every point really about the connections with what is happening within the department. In terms of the prison service again, they had bespoke training that they availed of. If you look at Davis House in their establishment, in terms of how that was structured, but also then about how that environment is worked in terms of that being more trauma-informed. Some people, if they're a purist, would say that you can't have a trauma-informed prison, but actually you can have a better prison, and that there has been a commitment to that, and again within their student officer programme. We're working with courts in terms of the courts modernisation process. New prison vans were bought actually years ago, and the lighting with them and the information that's within them, that again was to support this trauma-informed approach. Training with, I'm not going to court officers, you know, when you come down, when you're sent into prison and custody, in court basically to understand, gosh, you've just been sentenced, you're going in that van. So there was about that empathy and understanding about what works there in terms of that training. And then also the Lady Chief Justice is, for want of a phrase, all over this in terms of that connection with courts, the special courts, and understanding what this means within the Gillen Review and the application of those recommendations that come out of that. And then again, interaction with the Bar Council, the Law Society of Northern Ireland, and again, even through Queen's University in relation to that. So we've had really, now those places are all within their own part of their journey. I'm not trying to say here that is anywhere near a completion of that, but there is a commitment and a willingness to be part of that and to make that connection, understanding what that means for people in terms of being victims and witnesses and part of what is an adversarial court system. So in its entirety, justice has really understood and come together on a practical basis when PSNI are completing files for court, and how that then translates into PPS. PPS are again looking at their policies, they're looking at what does it mean for them, reviewing that from a trauma-informed perspective, what does that mean for understanding adversity in youth cases, all of that connection, and also understanding the impact of adversity across the life course and what that means for adult prisoners. Then in terms of disposals, and what that means in terms of what can somebody actually accommodate in order to help them on their rehabilitation journey. So that's outside my realm of knowledge, but in terms of that interconnection, that is definitely available.
Okay, Ciara? You're on mute there.
And just in relation to the second one, any institutional barriers that still exist, because I'm conscious, obviously, it is about having that quality time with individuals that do be presented at all levels within justice, and having that compassion and building an effective relationship so they can share their story. Is that seen as a barrier, or is there any other barriers?
Ciara, to be honest, I was trying to think when Helen was explaining her answer about any institutional barriers, and I actually think I like to talk about trauma-informed approaches as a train, and everybody seems to have got on the train within justice and understand the need for this approach. We may have barriers with other departments and other agencies who aren't quite there yet, but within the justice family, no, which is a really positive thing to say.
I just say that across the system, we are still to a certain extent personality dependent. So if the senior leaders in the organisations that are committed now move on, if we don't have it mandated either through programme for government or legislatively, which would be great as in some other jurisdictions, you go in that thing that maybe what gets counted gets done. What is the new thing? So it is about understanding the benefit to the whole system in Northern Ireland, and how do you make sure that that is actually embedded at the very most senior level within the whole system, that can't become it's somebody's view of it's a good thing to do or not. It's how do we really embed that and take the personalities out of it at a very, very senior level.
You would imagine that those who are sceptical, once they see a potential cost of 1.3 billion for not addressing it in the current financial climate. I would have thought that would have made them at least decide to be informed about it and see what differences could be made if it were to be implemented. Folks, could I thank you very much for your time. It's been really helpful. Some of the statistics included in your report are really stark. The Deputy Chairperson, I very much look forward to attending your conference at the start of next year. We're excited about that, albeit I'm certain there'll be some shocking revelations in there. But in terms of eating the elephant, because it is a massive subject, you're doing very well. I congratulate you for this work. I think it will make a difference in people's lives, and I'm delighted to see that other people are kind of buying into it and taking it forward. We will look forward then to receiving from you what our commitment might look like in practical terms, how you envisage that working out, you know, what the modules might be, things like that, so that we could determine the extent to which we could be committed or not. But I think in general, most people are supportive of what you're trying to do and absolutely see the benefits. It seems to me it is a win for the individual, it is a win for the organisations, it is a win for society, and for the sceptics it's a win financially. So thank you very much for your time, everybody. It's been really helpful to have you with us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Members, could I ask you to note the papers from the department?
Good.
Thank you. We're just getting the table set up for our next set of witnesses. Again, members, while we are getting set up, could I emphasise succinctness?
We ignored that, didn't we?
Indeed. But I mean, at this stage now we are significant, and I've no desire to curtail people's questioning, but I think that we don't always need an explanation for everything. Sometimes the question in itself is enough, and I'm as guilty as anybody else, so I will take it on board too. But I can't really ask officials to be succinct if we're not. Just while we're waiting, can I ask you all to turn to pages 99 to 158 of your meeting pack and 1 to 23 of the tabled pack for the relevant papers. Ladies, I'm sorry to have kept you waiting.
Thank you.
We've kind of been behind from the start. We were dealing with some bill stuff, and then obviously we had trauma-informed practice, which was a really interesting briefing. So once again, thank you very much for your patience with us today. Members, we have Deborah Brown, who's the Director of Justice Delivery Directorate, Louise Blair, the Head of Financial Planning and Support, and Andrea Quayle, Head of Financial Planning, Strategy and Support. Ladies, you're all very welcome. Thank you very much. We have read your briefing. I'm going to hand over to you to talk us through any other points that you want to make or anything in the papers you want to highlight, and then we'll open up to questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon, and thank you for the opportunity to give you an update on the department's budget. Some happier news this afternoon, thankfully. As you say, I'm joined today by Louise and by Andrea, and we're going to provide the committee with an update on the 24-25 January monitoring, along with the outcome of the 24-25 October monitoring. We'll also provide an update on the 25-26 budget and the current status of the department's transformation proposals. So as been highlighted in previous briefings, 24-25 was the most challenging budget to date for the department, and one that would require very careful financial management and difficult decisions to reduce the risk of an overspend. The issues and concerns have been widely documented in the media and debated by the Assembly, particularly in respect of the financial pressures facing the police service. With the outcome of the October monitoring now agreed by the Executive and the further proactive actions being taken across the department's business areas and identified during the January monitoring, this has resulted now in the department facing stabilisation pressures of £2 million. As the Finance Minister has highlighted in the oral statement to the Assembly on the 11th of November, the October monitoring outcome reflects the autumn budget set by the Chancellor on the 30th of October, providing the Executive with its final spending envelope for 24-25. While budgets will be finalised through the spring supplementary estimates, the Department of Finance have indicated that the prospect of any additional funding for departments is unlikely. Therefore, all departments must take action necessary to live within the October monitoring budget allocations. So the department will therefore have to take further actions to manage the remaining pressure of £2 million. It's also worth acknowledging that there remain significant pressures across the Northern Ireland bloc, and the Finance Minister has requested that any savings that can be made by departments are identified as early as possible and notified to DOF so that any funding available can then be prioritised. The department does not have any easements at this moment. Turning to the October and the January monitoring, the October monitoring outcome provided the department with a total allocation of £39.3 million, an additional £36.1 million towards the stabilisation pressures, plus 2.8 of earmarked funding for PSNI in respect of costs of policing the summer disorder, and £400,000 from the Northern Ireland Consolidated Fund towards the judicial salaries. Due to the delay in receiving the outcome of the October monitoring, the department was able then to consider the January monitoring position when making further budget allocations across the DOJ business areas. £7.4 million was available for internal reallocation. This was mainly due to increased easements as a result of the proactive action taken to reduce spend by holding vacancies as they arise across the department, lower costs for the Northern Ireland Prison Service as prison numbers have not increased as expected, and legacy history funding not required by the Office of the Police Ombudsman. Every effort has been made and continues to be made by the department's business areas to reduce the level of pressures, but this has not been achieved without adversely impacting the justice system, but not solely, but also including the police service. The department will continue to manage the remaining stabilisation pressures of £2 million in order to live within the budget for 24-25. This will require continued strong financial discipline and management by all DOJ business areas for the remainder of the year. In addition, the department continues to report exceptional pressures of £227 million in respect of the legal claims for holiday pay, McLeod injury to feelings and the PSNI data breach. The costs of settling these legal claims are not affordable within the department's existing budget under any circumstance. The department's available budget was also adjusted in October monitoring due to technical transfers of £1.6 million, with a further £1.4 million of technical transfers included in the January monitoring round. The technical transfers relate to transactions such as contributions to the Department of Health costs of custody nurses, the Rowan Sexual Assault Referral Centre, and funding for domestic and sexual abuse programmes. To turn now to the department's capital DEL budget, only a small change of £30,000 was made to the department's budget in October monitoring in relation to the resource to capital DEL reclassification for the Northern Ireland Safety Partnership, with a further reclassification request being made in January monitoring for £40,000. In addition, for January monitoring, the department has submitted reduced requirements of £6 million for capital DEL, which has arisen across a number of DOJ business areas for reasons such as delays in procurement and changes to leases. Finally, in relation to ring-fenced resource DEL, the department continues to face pressures of £11.2 million, which we bid for in the stage 2 of the January monitoring, and bids will also then require executive approval. The main element of this pressure is in relation to PSNI, due to substantial capital investment in prior years, resulting in higher depreciation charges and Northern Ireland Court Services due to the revaluation of the estate at the end of 23-24. So turning now to the 25-26 position. On the 30th of October, the Chancellor announced the outcome of the first year of a multi-year spending review. So the Executive will only be able to set a one-year budget for the incoming 25-26 financial year. The Department reported resource DEL stabilisation pressures of £207 million and capital pressures of £146 million in its return to DOF for 25-26. An additional resource DEL pressure of 15 million has subsequently been identified due to the increased cost of the employer's national insurance contributions arising from the changes announced by the Chancellor. The stabilisation pressures are against a planning budget of the 1.218 billion for the next 3 years, that being the budget for 24-25 position that was announced on the 29th of May 2004. The pressure of 207 included 38 million pressure for the additional security funding for PSNI, which was then confirmed in the Chancellor's statement and has been earmarked for 25-26, thereby reducing the departmental pressure to 169 million. Funding for the Tackling Paramilitarism programme has also been confirmed by DOF and match funded by Treasury, providing 16 million in total. This is cross-departmental funding. The exceptional pressures of 227 million relating to the legal cases for PSNI data breach, holiday pay and McLeod injury to feelings may not crystallise in 2024. Therefore, these continue to be highlighted to DOF as unaffordable by DOJ under any circumstance in future years in the absence of specific executive funding or a reserve claim from HM Treasury. Equality screening on the planning budget for 25-26 has been completed. All business areas have been screened out to the need for a full equality impact assessment. The Finance Minister intends to bring her budget recommendations to the Executive for agreement in December, and if agreed, public consultation will begin on the draft budget proposals. On the transformation bids then, as previously advised, 3 of the Department's transformation proposals are still under consideration by the Interim Public Sector Transformation Board. That is the speeding up and transforming the criminal justice system, the modernisation of electronic monitoring and tagging, and reducing reoffending prison population transformation initiatives. Following the Stage 2, the speeding up justice bid was reduced from the 40 million that was previously reported to you down to 20 million. The timescales for approval of transformation bids or the release of the funding is still unknown. However, I understand that a paper setting out the Transformation Board's recommendations is with the Finance Minister for consideration, with the aim of bringing those to the Executive in due course, and we will keep the committee updated. So in conclusion, I trust that we've provided a candid but helpful overview of where we are in terms of financial position. We continue to operate in a difficult financial environment, and the Department's position remains extremely challenging in terms of living within the budget made available to us. So I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to brief you. We very much value your role and your views, and we're very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Appreciate your briefing. Usually what we try to do is gather questions together in something of a theme. But we wanted to hear what you had to say first, so we haven't been able to do that. So I can't give you a heads up as to what's coming your way, unfortunately. I'm just going to open the floor to members. But look, suffice to say, we are aware of the very difficult position financially in which the Department finds itself. A number of us have advocated on the floor of the House for the Department and for its budget. Doubtless that will continue, but then I suppose it's up to us then in making those statements and advocating for the Department that we also can stand behind the decisions the Department takes and its prioritisation within its budget. Does anybody have any questions? I'm going to open the floor first of all.
Yeah, no, thanks very much for the briefing. I suppose you say, Deborah, it's a better picture from an outlook from where it was when you were last here. And hopefully that can continue in terms of the engagement that the Minister's having with the Finance Minister and the Executive. But you said in terms of the data breach and McLeod judgment, because they are huge costs, and are they likely to crystallise then in 2025, or will it be over a period of years? And you had touched on in terms of a reserved claim. Is there an update on where those discussions are at with Treasury?
So I think as the year progresses, the risk that those legal claims will slip into next year increases. And the issue around the reserve claim is still an open discussion which DOF are engaging with Treasury on, and we've always been very clear that's not something that we can meet ourselves. I think that at this stage is still that uncertainty as to which year it's going to fall into.
And I suppose just for further clarity, if it fell into 25, would it all be paid, or would it be over a period of years in terms of...
So we understand that they're
budgets?
trying to go for sort of like a lump claim
Yes.
of all of them together, so it doesn't really matter when it gets paid. Once that gets settled, it hits the budget,
Okay.
and
So
then
it's
it
an
gets
immediate,
paid out.
yeah.
So
Okay.
I don't think we need to worry too much, but there could be exceptional cases within that, etc., which then we may not be able to forecast what those costs might actually be. But all of that still is quite uncertain, unfortunately.
Okay, and I suppose just the additional of the ring fence money for the police for the summer events. So was that just, I mean, all that spent, I'm assuming, in terms of that was the additional
Yes, that was
policing resources that were needed?
That was the 2.75
Yeah.
million they needed, so that's all spent.
Okay. And the other bit was just around the vacancies that you touched on in terms of not filling. So just to try and get an understanding of the impact then that that has in terms of service delivery, and is that in particular areas, where you do want to push ahead, but you're restricted then because of the staff availability to do the work?
So, I think at this stage we're juggling all of that to try and minimise the impact across the board. I think our staff and post numbers have dropped by 50 since the start of the financial year. And as I say, that was a deliberate attempt to try and manage the very significant pressures that we were facing. As we get a 25-26 settlement, then that will be built into the strategic planning moving forward, the prioritisation of what we need to do and what the Minister wants done over that financial year and into the future financial years. And then that would dictate where staff resource needs to be focused, and perhaps where we need to slow down, pause or stop some areas of work.
I suppose just feeding in, sorry, it was my last point on the employer contributions, which is a big one as well. So I know there's obviously Treasury are saying there'll be a contribution of sorts for civil service or departments, but obviously arm's length bodies. So just to get a sense of how that will impact the departmental remit in terms of those bodies and what preparatory work is being done now to understand the scale of the challenge then for arm's length bodies, and is there a rough figure of what that could be?
So on top of the 169 for next year, we think there's about another 15 million for the employer contributions, but we're still working our way through that with the arm's length bodies as well. But that 15 million covers, including the police at the minute, that's our estimation. But we're still working our way through it. So I can't say that's a definitive figure, but we're working our way.
Another can be updated.
Absolutely, and I think the concern would be that we don't get all of that met. We're hoping we'll get some of it met, but we may not get all of it met, so that will just increase that 169 million pressure even further.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. And Connie.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for coming in today. I recently joined this committee, so I haven't previously heard from you, so I was wondering if you could maybe have any figures or figures you could pass along to us as a committee around how the Justice Department's budget has actually been squeezed over the last, since devolution of justice really. I know that's been discussed and alluded to on the floor of the Chamber. It's just something that wasn't really included in the figures we have in front of us.
We have an analysis of that, so I'm very happy to send you that, if that's okay. Yeah,
thank you. And just following up on that, you're obviously working very hard to ensure that there is no overspend in the department. Could you maybe just lay out for me the consequences if we do overspend?
So if we overspend, then we have an excess vote, and that would result in us being up in front of the PAC. But worse than that, that would mean that the bloc would overspend, and then that would mean that it'd be at risk of having to pay out back the £559 million that we were forgone. So it would have a very significant impact, not just for DOJ, but for all departments. So all departments at the minute are having to bear down on their spend to ensure that we do not overspend in this financial year.
Well, thank you. It's obviously really important, so we appreciate the work you're doing to ensure that doesn't happen. Thank you.
Does anybody else have anything? I've got a couple of things, if that's all right. If I could ask, it's for us, it's page 105, just with regard to protocol funding. There's talk about bids, the value of 25.1 million in relation to PSNI and core department for non-ring fence resource Dale, and also bids for 0.4 million from and 0.5 capital respectively from PSNI, and then more stuff around there, just in your paragraph 7, 8 and 9. Could you give us some indication as to what that's for and what that's about?
So those are the costs that are associated with the Northern Ireland Protocol. So policing have actually looked at what that means for them. But even though those bids weren't met in full, we knew that there was a significant risk that they wouldn't be met in full, so they were included in the pressures that we were reporting. So when we have allocated the funding to PSNI, the 36 million this year, that means they can cover all of those costs. So those are the costs that they say are associated with that element.
In terms of security risk or societal disorder, or do you know what it relates to?
I would have to get you some more detail, to be honest, just on the specifics of it.
Yeah, I'm kind of interested to understand that. The other issue is the one you referred to about, there was stuff in the PSNI now about depreciation.
Yeah.
Please forgive me, but just to enhance my kind of understanding of these things, how does that work? Because I mean, I kind of thought that at this point property prices were on the increase and so on. So explain to me how that works. So, in terms of this calculation.
So this is the valuation of their assets.
Okay.
So assets have to be valued. Mm-hmm. At this point, they're forecasting what the valuations will be. The valuations will not get done until the new year. So on the basis of that, they estimate the valuations will increase. As a consequence of that, the depreciation charges go up. And that's where that pressure arises. It's from, and it's ring-fenced resource Del. And in the past, we have been reasonably successful in securing ring-fenced resource Del. So that's what that is.
Thank you. Yes, I've got Justin there. I'm just going to work through mine and I'll call him. And we've noted that then about reduced capital 6.1 million being returned to you. This 40,000 to the Road Safety Partnership, is that in addition to what has previously been returned from them or reallocated from them? Because that's the second time we've seen a figure relating to them, and I'm not clear whether it's part of the same thing or whether it's different or whether it's a repetition. But money was transferred previously from them.
I think it's for exactly the same thing, but again, I can take that away.
It's additional. They got 30k in October and then 40k in January, so it is for the same element of funding, but there are two reclassifications in the monitoring rounds.
And that's essentially money that they didn't use and it's being returned?
No, they're reclassifying it, so it's being used to fund capital. So they had the fee income and they're reclassifying it to capital, to spend as capital.
I think the first one, actually, there was money returned because I think the Department of Infrastructure or the Committee for Infrastructure were having a look at that too.
Okay, well, look, we can have a look to see if anything got returned.
Yeah, there's something going on there with their budgets. You also note the national insurance contributions as a result of the budget, then 15 million. That's fair enough. You've kind of covered the things that I needed. I just had a couple of housekeeping things that I wanted to understand. Within the paper, we're advised that at the last monitoring round, you submitted a bid to the department and that came to us the same day, but this time the paper specifies it was going to come to us a week later. Could everybody who's online please mute? Could you maybe give us an indication as to why that is and what that week was for?
Sorry, I'm not sure I'm following. There was a week where...
So whenever the papers came through for the previous monitoring round, they were issued to us the same day as they were issued to the Department of Finance. But this time it's specified within the paper there's going to be a week between those going to the Department of Finance and coming to us. It's just to understand why. It's not that I'm objecting to it, it's just to understand why.
I'm actually not very sure. I'll have to, again, I apologise, I'll have to take that away and just look at that process point for you.
No, that's okay. It's just because obviously then kind of things, there was stuff then that came to us a bit later than our pack was issued, and so we weren't able to look at all the stuff all together.
Right,
so that was the only reason why I was asking. Okay. The other thing that I think I'm going to flag up to you here, because I've raised it and I think it would be not the right thing to do whenever you're in front of me, is to not raise it. And that was to express, I had expressed disappointment that whenever there was additional monies given to the department, the Minister issued a press release, but that didn't come to the committee. It came to the committee a number of days later. How the money was to be divided within the departmental sections didn't come to us, and a number of us learned about that through media and through Cool FM and so on, and somebody sent it to me on a screenshot. Yeah. And it just seemed, it just wasn't ideal, let me put it that way. So I had raised it previously. I think it wouldn't be right to have raised it behind your back, as it were. I think it's fair to say it. And look, I think we just had an expectation that if the Minister was issuing a press release, it could have been copied into us at the time so that we had some indication as to how she was going to allocate the money. It's not a gripe, it's just a...
We will take that on board for the next time and ensure that we line that up better so that you have that in advance.
Well, like, this is a committee that's really engaged
Absolutely.
in what's going on with the department. We want to see the department do well. So, you know, we would have been interested to see it earlier than we had it, but thank you very much. I'm not going to crib about that. Justin.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks, Deborah, Louise, and Andrea. I'm a little bit concerned at what has been outlined in the briefing in relation to the draft 2025-2026 budget, the potential consequences and decisions that could be required go against every bit of evidence that this committee has heard through evidence sessions and everything that we hear as reps in our constituency from our constituents. Just last week, we had an update on the Gillen Review implementation and a discussion about access to justice, including a conversation around domestic abuse protection orders and notices. The week before that, we had the Commissioner Designate for Victims of Crime attend the committee. Is it now the case that we won't be able to deliver on these vital services? And in relation to the budget more generally, as proposed, is the Department of Justice now going to have to reduce its workforce? Are the police not going to be able to proceed with officer and staff recruitment above the current levels of 7,000? To reach the 7,000 numbers required by 2028. Legal Services Agency, will they have to pay bills to budget and no more with the time taken to pay bills to deteriorate? NA Prison Service would likely see substantial reductions in staffing. NA Courts and Tribunal Service and other organisations would require reductions in the workforce. Is this the reality of the budget as presented?
So there is no budget being presented. We have presented the position for 25-26 against the opening 24-25 budget. And as you have seen, the department has been successful in the current year and in previous years in securing additional funding. And I would like to think that the justice position is very clearly understood and that we would get allocations to ensure that we can deliver legal aid, that we can sustain the police service and start to grow the numbers. We are committed to all of those things, but of course they will be subject to whatever the budget is. Only once we know what the budget is can we sit down and say, where are the priorities, where should the funding be focused, and develop a number of options. And of course that will be subject to consultation as well, and all of that will be taken on board and until we do that, we can't really second guess what exactly that would mean for the department. So I am hoping, as I said, that there will be a budget paper hopefully in the coming weeks, and then that would allow the consultation process to start and for us to start to then to work out what that provisional budget might mean for the Department of Justice in respect of all of those very vital services, Justin, that you outline.
You're outlining the worst but hoping for the best.
Yes.
Justin, are you finished or have you more there to follow up on?
Yeah, listen, I think we'll have to wait and see until we know more. I can't really bang that drum too hard, so I understand. Okay, so thank you for your response.
Okay. Thank you, Justin. Deirdre?
Just for clarity on the 169 pressure then, in terms of the budget, you're comparing that against the baseline rather than in-year uplifts then?
Was the exercise by DOF said to use the opening 24-25
okay.
as reported in May of 2024. So that's what they've asked us to do that scenario on.
Okay, so that could change then depending, right?
I would hope that would change.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
I mean, there's no doubt that the consequences you have outlined are very grave, not just for the department, but for wider society and indeed the executive's priorities. And also, I mean, the policing board has heard the past couple of months from the chief constable about his fears that the PSNI would no longer be able to keep the public safe, nor would they be able to keep women and girls safe, another executive priority. So hopefully then the bid works out. because yes, we understand that there are significant issues at play, but I also, just before you leave, I want to ask you with regard to the bill, because if you don't get what you need to provide the current services as they exist now, next year, there are implications there in the bill, for example, of taking additional powers and responsibilities. How are the costs for those going to be met?
So again, it'll have to be a case of looking at all the things that the department needs to deliver, and then an element of prioritisation will have to happen. Absolutely taking into account the consequences of not doing it immediately or leaving it to a later stage. And of course, there will be very, very tough decisions in there, but we still continue to make the really strong case for DOJ and the need for that additional funding, and for it to be made on a sustained basis, because this living one year to the next, as you know, is not going to help improve the justice system and improve the delays that we have and improve the experiences for victims and witnesses.
With regard to the PSNI's budget and the fact that they're the only service in the UK that has to operate on an annual basis, and also they're not allowed to carry reserves and they're not allowed to borrow money, much in the same way as was the position for the housing executive, but they're the only service in the UK that's faced with that position. If that were to change, is that done at the Assembly? Is it done at Parliament? And is there any consideration of that changing to allow the PSNI to be more strategic? I mean, bearing in mind they're 65% of your budget, if they were allowed to be more strategic in how they operate financially, there might be benefits to be gained for the department overall. Has that been considered?
We have not given that any huge consideration, but of course it's something that we'll want to explore with DOF if we don't get a sustained budget moving forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Deborah. Does anybody have anything else? No? Then could I thank you all for your evidence today. We appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time. Apologies once again that we were running late. Thank you. But you're probably used to it by now. Members, could I get your agreement to note the papers?
Noted.
Thank you. Agenda item 8 is the SL1 Police Pensions Amendment number 2 Regulations Northern Ireland 2024, and I would ask you to turn to pages 159 to 195 of your meeting pack for the papers. The Department's proposing to bring forward a statutory rule under powers conferred by the Public Service Pensions Act Northern Ireland 2014. The purpose of the regulations is to introduce a revised employee contribution rate and bandings to meet the 0.2% shortfall in yield identified in 2020 police pension valuation. Members, it's proposed that the regulations will be subject to the negative resolution procedure, which ultimately means that they would go through unless we were to pray against them or anybody was to pray against them. Can I ask whether or not you're content with the proposed statutory rule, or if any further information or clarification is required? And bear in mind the conversation that we had earlier with the examiner.
We've been through parts of this before, so content from my end.
Yeah, it seems to be a very technical issue that's very narrow and targeted. So are members agreed then, yes? Mm-hmm. Thank you. Agenda item 9 is the Forward Work Programme. An updated Forward Work Programme is at pages 197 to 206 of the pack, and the Department's Forward Work Programme is at pages 207 to 208 of the pack. I'd ask you to note the documents unless you want to raise any issues, but the other thing I want to say is that please bear in mind these are fluid and subject to change with regard to time, availability, all of those things. Are you content to note? Also, please do note that the agenda for the 16th of January is heavy. So we're keen to not be adding anything else in there unless we need to. Agenda item 10 is correspondence. There's a correspondence memo and 15 items of correspondence at pages 209 to 294 of the pack. As usual, I'm going to draw your attention to a number of them, and then I'm going to open up the floor for others to comment or highlight anything that they so wish. Just let me get the pages up myself. Initially then, I'm going to refer you to item 1010, which is correspondence from the Prisoner Ombudsman's Office, and that's at page 262. You'll see that there's a request from the newly appointed Ombudsman for an introductory meeting with me as chairperson of the committee. Are you agreed that I would go and meet Darren Jones?
Great.
Thank you. And then just note that correspondence then. Item 10.12 is correspondence from the PPS, which is at page 264, and that's an invitation for the Deputy Chairperson and I to visit the offices of the PPS to speak to its staff about their work early next year, with a view to a potential further visit by other committee members later in the year. My view on this is, I think a visit would be welcome, but I would like us, I don't know how the Deputy Chairperson feels, but I would like us to go together. I think there's merit in us going together. It's not, they offered some time ago, it's not that we're not willing and eager to take up the offer, it's just been the work programme thus far. But I think that we have opportunities as we progress through the bill to actually use a visit to the PPS to help us engage further with issues relating to the bill, and I would like to combine that. So it's no snub on our part. I just think that it'd be worthwhile for the committee to go together, and we're very grateful to the PPS for his offer, and we certainly will take him up on it, but probably a bit later in the year as we work our way through the bill. Are members content with that approach?
Great, yeah.
Thank you. Item 10.14 is correspondence from K9 Search and Rescue, and that's at pages 267 to 278 of the pack. It's a request for the committee to seek clarity from the Department of Justice regarding its decision to decline the application by K9 Search and Rescue Northern Ireland to join the Northern Ireland Search and Rescue Practitioners Group. So first of all, can we note the correspondence?
Noted.
Secondly, how do we pursue this? I think it's a very difficult situation. It seems to me, on the face of it, and I've read the criteria, I've read the processes, but it seems to me, if there are opportunities for professional people to go and help find those who are lost, then those should be taken. And the application process seems to me bizarre, because it's not an invitation to apply when there is a gap, but you're only admitted, it seems, when there's a gap. Mm-hmm. So how is that determined? And I'm not clear either on the overlaps between the practitioners who decide whether or not somebody else will be admitted, and indeed the appeal body. Does anybody else have any thoughts on this?
I'd be keen to get more info. I mean, I would have been aware of some of the Belfast or community search and rescue, and just how they had to go through primarily the police, even though they were pretty much doing the initial work in a search. So I'd be keen to just get more information and understanding, as you say, Joanne, around how people are admitted, what is the criteria, what kind of precludes them then in terms of how this is working, and are there any others out there that have been refused as well, so just to try and get a broader sense of what's going on in this arena.
Yeah, I think this is a very professional outfit. Yeah, Connie, I'll bring you in now. It's a really professional outfit, and it seems to me, why would we want to exclude people? And there may be a limited amount of money, but then it's just divided up differently. I suppose dependent on people's involvement in searches and so on. Connie?
Yeah, I am aware of the group. They're based in my constituency, and I've previously met with them, and they do absolutely brilliant work, and I think we can understand their disappointment. And I think they're looking for us to ask for clarity in the process, which I think we could do as a committee, and maybe investigate if there's an appeals process we could direct them towards as well, and no issue at all with seeking further clarity as well as a committee on the whole process.
Well, there is an appeals process,
yeah.
Which is a different body. What we're not afforded within the papers is, as Deirdre says, the criteria under which somebody might be accepted. And this rejection seems to be on the basis of there is no gap. But then maybe it would be better to invite applications at the time when there is a gap, as opposed to just allowing people to apply and then constantly reject them. But we're not clear either what's considered in the course of the appeal, nor are we clear about the membership of each body and whether or not there is overlap within it. I don't think this whole thing is as transparent as it might be. So are we content then to pursue the issue with the department on the basis that K9 might be admitted? Deirdre?
Just to get a better understanding of the broader landscape and how they sit within this and who else is in it or not.
Yeah.
So just to try and get a broad sense, because there may be a genuine rationale that we just don't know that makes sense, but
what
I would like to understand that a bit more broadly.
What they're saying is there's already a dog search unit, plus the PSNI has a dog search unit. But I imagine if you're at the other side of that, we've seen a number of people missing in the course of the past number of weeks, and if you're at the other side of that, are you going to turn down another set of dogs and another set of people to come and search for your loved one who's missing? So it seems to me this is an opportunity potentially lost to Northern Ireland. So we do need to understand the processes and the criteria. Yeah?
Great.
Thank you. Item 10.16 is corresponds from the Peace Summit partners, and that's at pages 281 to 294 of the meeting pack, and that's a request to meet the committee. Are members content to note this item of correspondence? Are members content? Do members wish to arrange a meeting?
I don't know. I mean, I'm flexible in terms of even, is it more a TEO kind of focus or not, or are they asking to meet TEO as well? I don't know. Or if the committee's minded to do, our timetable's pretty extensive coming into next year, and I'm conscious our focus is the Justice Bill, so if people are minded, if it's not TEO, to do a meeting the way we've done before, an informal meeting or something with, rather than a formal, because as you say, like January and February, March is crazy, just with the Justice Bill and the kind of hearings that we're going to be doing. And if it's anything like the way we like to ask questions, we're not going to stick to time. Like that's...
Yeah, it may be one of those ones where interested members could, the invitation is there to all members. It may be that interested members could go back, are interested and available, because it's not always down to interest. Sometimes it's just down to pure availability. That those who wish to pursue that then can pursue that directly. Does that seem reasonable? Does anybody have anything else they want to raise? I've got a couple of things. We'll open to the floor first. Anybody else, anything in correspondence they want to raise?
Nope.
I had a couple of things I just want to work through, if you'll bear with me, please. Yes, I want to bring to your attention the letter that there is from the mental health champion. You'll recall that originally the mental health champion had published an open letter, and there was some criticism within that around the right person, right care approach. In fairness to Siobhan, she has come back to say she's following up on that, because since her last communication, she's had very helpful meetings with staff who are overseeing the rollout of the policy in PSNI, and also the leads from the Departments of Health and Justice who head up the Strategic Oversight Group. She says that she's also received a copy of the draft terms of reference for the Oversight Group, and it includes a joint multi-agency governance structure for developing, implementing and monitoring the RCRP approach in Northern Ireland. She sees that the goal of partnership, working with health as a partner in the process, is clearly set out, and she says it's now clear that the policy will be implemented in stages and monitored, and the learning from the implementation of this policy in other UK regions will inform how this is rolled out in Northern Ireland. She says she's received some more information regarding the ways in which cases are to be assessed in relation to risk to life and how suicide risk is assessed. She then says she's reassured that the two departments are working together in partnership on the issue, and it remains her view that the policy should be implemented in tandem with the Regional Crisis Intervention Service, which includes community-based intervention, problem-solving approaches provided by third sector organisations who contact the person promptly after a crisis. She highlights that resources will be required to deliver this service on the ground, and she'll be receiving updates on the implementation of the right care, right person following each meeting of the Oversight Group, and she'll be in a position to highlight any difficulties and barriers to the delivery of right care to those with mental health and related needs. So I think that's a really positive step forward, actually. And in fairness, to the mental health champion. I think she didn't need to put that on the record, but she has, and I welcome that from her, and I admire her for doing that. A couple of other bits, just could somebody direct me again to, let me see, I just want to get back to my original index. The correspondence members of page 209, just bear with me because I whizzed through there to get to the, yeah. There's information there about the bereavement service. We've got a couple of issues of correspondence about that. Could I ask that we circulate the responses that we have received to those who wrote to us originally about the issue? That's the Tell Us Once campaign. Rather than just noting that, we should be responding to those people. Our members agreed?
Agreed.
There's a report in there from the Committee for Finance about quarterly sickness absence in the Northern Ireland Civil Service. Would members be content if we wrote to the department or our home department to establish what they intend to do to address these issues and what they find to be the root causes?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. You'll note there's correspondence in there from the Association of British Insurers about the higher cost of motor insurance claims in Northern Ireland from the Law Society. Justin, I think that's one for you. And I think that is it. Does anybody else have anything else? No? Right, are you content to note everything else then? Yep. Thank you.
Yep.
Right, members, the committee team will continue to receive correspondence from stakeholders in the upcoming recess period, and it's standard practice to include such items for consideration at the committee's first meeting after recess, which is going to be on the 16th of January 2025. Do you wish to agree any urgent matters via correspondence during recess?
Yep. Urgent, yeah.
Thank you. In terms of chairperson's business, which is agenda item 11, it's standard practice to delegate authority to the chairperson and deputy chairperson during periods of recess to submit views on the releasing or withholding of any information in any non-routine or contentious FOI requests received by the committee, and that any views expressed would be brought to the attention of the committee at the first meeting after recess. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Agenda item 12 is any other business. Do members have any other business? No? I've got a couple then. Could I ask, we did not send in our correspondence around Inverary House, what we did not do was issue a thank you letter to Inverary House and its residents and the folks from Mindwise. I think we should do that. I think it was an incredibly worthwhile visit.
Yeah.
There was a lot of learning in that, and would that there was much greater collaboration in terms of accommodation for people who find themselves in those circumstances, but hopefully maybe we can be the instigators of that. I want to welcome Gemma. I know that the Deputy Chair welcomed last week, Gemma, but I haven't had a chance to say hello and welcome. It's good to have you with us.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Finally, members, penultimately, I want to say, members, this is Caroline's last meeting with us. Caroline is moving on to higher and better things. So
congratulations.
Well done.
And thank you.
I kind of want to publicly express to Caroline our appreciation for her diligence, her effort, her support. She's incredibly conscientious. I think we have all valued her time here with us and the learning and insight that she brings. So, Caroline, we wish you every success in your new role, and thank you for everything and the assistance and support that you've given to this committee. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and just thank you to you and to the committee. I think it's really engaged, collegiate and constructive committee, and I just wish you every success and all the best with the Justice Bill and all the business in the time ahead.
Thank you very much, and you too. Also, I want to, just as we run up to Christmas, I want to thank the committee team for all the work that they do. The Committee for Justice is an incredibly busy committee. There's a lot of work goes on in the background, and I want to thank everybody because we've got a team of officials who are really committed to this committee and to doing things the right way, and certainly I'm inordinately grateful for that. I'd like to put on record all of our support and thanks to Caroline and her team for all that they've done thus far in the mandate. And with that, I'd like to wish all of you a happy Christmas. Go and enjoy recess, and we'll see you in January.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Happy Christmas.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Committee Room 30, sound. 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 Committee Room 30, sound.